In this module, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of lean startup. Now, lean startup is a big topic, and we only do an overview of it in this unit. In the unit Startup Fundamentals, lean startup is explored in much more detail, and you have the opportunity to put it into practice on your own business idea. Lean startup is a new way of approaching entrepreneurship that builds on well-established foundations. It's always been known that one of the reasons businesses fail is that they can't find the right fit with the marketplace. In other words, they don't have the product that people want to buy, or they don't have it in quite the right format. So one of the advantages of lean startup is working out that product market fit early. It was popularized by a couple of practitioners in particular. Ries and Steve Blank are both entrepreneurs. Ries comes from a technology startup background, software engineering, and Steve Blank, I'm not sure what his original businesses are, but his focus is on discovering customers and working out what they want from you. It's been influential in all fields of entrepreneurship, not just startups. So Steve Blank in particular has run his customer discovery workshops in for university staff, as well as in universities, in the corporate sector, and even in the military and in medical research. It's been widely covered in the business media, so you won't have any trouble finding articles about it and lots of opinions. So what's the difference between lean startup and traditional startup? Well, the traditional approach was that you work out what customers want before you launch your business, which is very sensible. But the problem is that that's a lengthy process, and that customers don't often know what they want until you show them something, and then they'll tell you that's not what they want, but they still can't tell you exactly what they do want. What they will tell you, though, is what's wrong with what you've given them. So the lean startup approach is to actually test something on the customers as early as possible and see how they react and improve it. So in other words, you really launch your business before you've got a business model. The traditional approach works out the business model, writes a business plan, and launches the business. It involves a lot of business planning before you launch. The idea of that is to minimize risk, and that's a good way of approaching it. The lean startup approach argues that the best way to minimize risk is to actually do only enough planning to design and launch a minimum viable product, and then adapt it to actually meet the needs of the customers as you get feedback from them. A traditional approach means that you get everything right as far as you can before you launch, and you start strong and you start big. Whereas the lean startup approach is that you start small and you know what assumptions you are testing, and most crucially, you learn from the feedback. Why do lean? The main reason is to minimize risk. As we've said, businesses fail due to lack of product market fit. So this is a recap of what we've discussed earlier, but it's worth reminding yourself. There isn't enough demand. The market's too small. Your product doesn't solve the problem well enough. It isn't a good enough fit for the market. People don't need it badly enough, or want it badly enough, the compelling need to buy, or it's not value for money. In the eyes of the customer, however good value you might think it is, if they don't, you don't have a value proposition that will sell. So, the idea is to validate your assumptions about these factors as early as possible. Ries developed 5 principles. First of all, entrepreneurs are everywhere. In fact, I won't read them all out because I'm going to go through each of them in turn. So, entrepreneurs are everywhere. The stereotype startup in Silicon Valley is a couple of students, usually male, who get together in their garage. You don't have to be in a garage. Entrepreneurs operate in whatever environment their opportunity takes them to, which could be corporate boardrooms, it could be developing countries. It's wherever. It's about a mindset rather than a place. Entrepreneurship is management. So it's just a different type of management. So entrepreneurs can't get away from the messy people management problems that exist in big organizations or small organizations. So entrepreneurs have to be able to create an environment in which people can work creatively towards a common purpose. And if they're not good at management, they need to involve people who are good at management. And by management here, I'm typically talking about managing people. Validated learning. Here's a definition from Ries. Startups exist not to make stuff, make money, or serve customers. They exist to learn how to build a sustainable business. And that sustainable business delivers value to customers. So you can learn by experimenting, seeing what you expected to happen, what did happen, and adjusting your product accordingly. Does this mean that you ignore products, customers, or making money? No, 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 no. It means that you have to find a business model that puts all of these things together. When you've found it and implemented it and established that it works, you're no longer a startup. But, warning, this may take some time. Innovation accounting is something that Ries goes into in quite some detail. So, how do you know if you're making progress? One of the problems with the business plan, especially if you've got somebody to invest in it, is that you've made a plan, you've said what you're going to do, you've said when you're going to do it by, and how you'll know if you succeeded. Those things are often called milestones. Investors like milestones because they give them a date and a deliverable on that date that will allow them to show whether you're succeeding. The problem is, as Ries discovered by the hard way, by doing it wrong, is that you have to check that you're doing the right things, not just doing things. The problem with a business plan is, as Steve Blank says, it rarely survives first contact with the customer. So there's not much point in continuing to follow a business plan which your customer has already told you is not correct. So you have to be able to go back and check whether you're doing the right things and readjust if you're not. The way to do this is this build, measure, learn approach. You have an idea, your initial idea. It's unlikely to be perfect. In fact, it's definitely not going to be perfect, but there's probably a grain of value in it. So what you do is you test it as early as possible. You build a minimum viable product. And that's just something that you can show to a prospective customer to give them an idea of what you're trying to achieve. Then you measure. You see what they say. You get feedback from them. That's data. From that data, you learn and you come up with a better idea. So you develop a next version of the minimum viable product, which has made a change to test whether this will be better than what you had before. And you get new feedback. And from that feedback, you will start to learn whether your assumptions are correct or partly correct or completely wrong, and you have to start again. The idea of the minimum viable product is that it's as cheap and quick as possible, which means that you commit as few resources as possible as you're starting up your business. It works best for, well, it works for a lot of things really. Ideas that can disrupt a market are interesting because often the customers won't be able to tell you what they want until they see what you're offering them. So there's not a clear customer group, there's not a clear business model. The only way you're going to discover it is by testing it and adjusting it constantly until you've got something that people go, oh yeah, I want to buy that. And then you've got something that you can launch and continue to adapt. Well, you don't even know if it'll work until you do it, and that's more common than you might think. Or ideas where developing your product and service will be expensive, and you need to know that somebody's going to want to buy it first. There's an example of that on a video on the Steve Blank website, where he's running a workshop for medical researchers. This particular team does some customer validation with surgeons to find out what they think would be the value of preventing a certain surgical procedure. And guess what? The price that they were going to charge for it, the surgeons said it wasn't worth that much. But, they said, if you could develop a procedure that would avoid this type of surgical operation instead, that would be worth much more. It saved them years of development time. Years. So, the implications of lean startup: more doing and less planning. It deals with the inevitable uncertainty, not by pretending it doesn't exist and writing a business plan that makes assumptions, but by experimenting and learning from the results. So the only way to fail with a lean startup is to fail to learn from the results of your experiments. Or, I'll add to that, to fail to make any experiments in the first place. In that case, you're just dreaming and not doing. It also encourages entrepreneurs to get to know their customers. And often businesses don't really understand what their customers want. With lean startup, you can't avoid it. And of course, the big benefit is it minimises commitment of resources up front, which means you can get started more cheaply and more quickly. And, above all, it's a systematic process that can be learned and doesn't rely on entrepreneurial instinct. Here's a few examples, and you can probably find more recent ones of lean startup in action. So the BRW, Business Review Weekly, publishes an annual list of fast starters, and 1 in 10 of these, 10% of these, started up with less than $5,000 in capital. There's some here, one that started with $37.50, one with $450. You can look those examples up and see how they did it. Common message: more capital at the start might have hindered rather than helped the business. Now that's an interesting idea. Most of us would think that having more money available would be an advantage. The problem with having money available is the more cash you have, the less hard you have to think about what to spend it on. If you are really limited with cash and resources, you have to think very hard about what's the best use of them, and that's a good discipline. So takeaways: many startups fail, and the most common reason that they fail is because they don't have the right product for the market. Lean startup helps you find that product market fit quickly and cheaply by identifying your assumptions and testing them quickly and cheaply. In other words, you don't assume you know what your customers want. You actually show them something, give them something, ask them to get involved in feedback on something, and they will react to that and tell you what they like about it and what they don't like about it. And if you use this method, it makes it more likely that you will find the product market fit and you'll develop a sustainable business model to launch.